Now, the last video, looking at the first part of chapter 16 of the history of the Russian Revolution, discussed how Lenin, now in Petrograd, and Trotsky, still prevented from returning to Russia by the British, were both putting forward a position calling for a proletarian-led socialist revolution, contrary to the positions of the editors of Pravda, like Kamenev and Stalin. And remarkably, given Lenin's almost total political isolation on his arrival in Petrograd on April the 4th, by the time Trotsky arrived about a month later, the vast majority of the Bolsheviks had already been won to Lenin's position. And to explain this rapid turnaround, it's important to remember the preceding history of the Bolshevik Party. Because the theoretical and practical struggle against both Tsarism and Menshevism have built the party on a solid foundation of revolutionary workers who had a strong tradition of opposition to class collaborationism, a tradition in total contradiction to the position that was then being put forward by Kamenev and Stalin in March 1917. In particular, the Bolshevik Party had gained strength in the upward years of 1912 to 1914, recruiting a proletarian layer that Lenin had looked to with confidence as being the class-conscious workers, from among whom, in spite of all difficulties, a new staff of leaders will arise. Lenin was now relying on this revolutionary backbone of Bolshevism to defeat the dogmatic position of the party leadership. Indeed, these worker Bolsheviks, who had played such a decisive role during the February Revolution, had, in effect, already been following Lenin's line. Unlike the Mensheviks, the Bolshevik ranks had acted uncompromisingly, both during and after the revolution. They ensured that momentum was kept up with their agitation for the 8-hour day and their efforts to make sure that the Tsarist officials were arrested and a workers' militia set up. As one of their number, Olminsky, recalled, we, or at least many of us, were unconsciously steering a course towards proletarian revolution, although thinking we were steering a course towards a bourgeois democratic revolution. In other words, we were preparing for the October Revolution while thinking we were preparing the February. Now, Lenin's formula had led to an element of contradiction in the theoretical education of the Bolshevik cadres, although the revolutionary side had won out in February. As one remarked in the discussion on Lenin's theses, the prognosis made by the Bolsheviks proved wrong, but their tactics were right. And the worker Bolsheviks thought it obvious that the class which had won the victory should seize the power, but had to draw back in the face of the theoretical obstacles thrown up by Stalin, Kamenev, and so on. And these leaders returning from exile gained their commanding positions due to their prestige. However, in reality, they were out of touch with the mood of the workers, having spent months or even years alone or in small groups outside active work. Their views corresponded to the difficult days at the start of the war, made worse by their subsequent isolation. The party ranks were far more conscious of the enormous shifts of opinion produced by the war and revolution. The workers fought instinctively against the leaders, illustrated, for example, by the Vyborg district's angry protest against Pravda's line discussed previously. But they lacked the theoretical resources to defend their position. But now, armed with Lenin's April theses, the party ranks immediately saw a way forward and came over to Lenin's position. As one delegate, Ludmila Stahl, said to the Petrograd City Conference of the Bolsheviks on the 14th of April, "We know only the formulas of 1905. Seeing the independent creative work of the people, we could not teach them. Our comrades could only limit themselves to getting ready for the Constituent Assembly by parliamentary means, and took no account of the possibility of going farther. In accepting the slogans of Lenin, we are now doing what life itself suggests to us. We need not fear the commune and say that we already have a workers' government. The Commune of Paris was not only a workers' but also a petty bourgeois government. Lenin's confidence in the proletarian core of the party was proved to be well-founded. District after district declared for Lenin's position, so that by April the 24th, the date set for the decisive All-Russian Bolshevik Conference, the whole of the Petrograd organisation was already in favour of his theses. The conference, held from April the 24th to the 29th, gave overwhelming support to Lenin's position. The initial vote for the conference presidium gave an indication of the ways things would go, with neither Kamenev nor Stalin being elected. And after that, their opposition gained at most 7 votes from the 149 delegates. The conference also showed that the party had grown greatly, both politically and qualitatively, with the reported membership standing at 79,000, of whom 15,000 lived in Petrograd. And this compared to about 8,000 nationally after the February Revolution, so an appreciable gain. The loss of a few old Bolsheviks from the party during the debate had clearly been no great loss. Now, some of the old leadership did try to defend their position, although Stalin noticeably remained silent and waited for people to forget his errors. Some old Bolsheviks emphasised the length of their membership and claimed they were defending the real traditions of the party. In reality, as Trotsky says, they were only defending that part of Bolshevism's traditions that had not passed the test of history. And he also notes that the only exception to the leftward shift came when a proposal was made to take part in the planned recall conference of the Zimmerwald pacifists. Lenin objected that the Bolsheviks had to make a clean break with exactly these kind of reformist trends, but he was the only one to vote against. In reality, this was perhaps the last gasp of the tendency within the Bolsheviks to fear the party's supposed isolation from the movement. In reality, isolation only from its reformist leaders. And in effect, Lenin's policy was realised because the divided Zimmerwaldists never held their meeting. It's worth raising the question, what was the role of Lenin as an individual in history? Would the October Revolution have succeeded if Lenin as an individual had not been there in Petrograd in April and beyond? Well, to answer that question, Trotsky raises a number of important points in his history. And let's start with Lenin's careful method of debate, a method which can be seen in all his speeches and articles of April 1917. Lenin always made his points boldly, but avoided attacking party comrades by name except where absolutely necessary, Trotsky says. And in this way, he made it easier for people to change their position in a debate and try to reduce the chance of personal antagonisms, which could damage the internal life of the party. Lenin won through because his position reflected not only the mood of the worker Bolsheviks, but was also based on the objective needs of the situation. Stalin and Kamenev's opportunism was an attempt to adapt the party's policy to the temporary illusions of the masses, whereas Lenin saw beyond those moods. Trotsky makes the point that the chief strength of Lenin lay in his understanding the inner logic of the movement and guiding his policy by it. He did not impose his plan on the masses. He helped the masses to recognize and realize their own plan. When Lenin reduced all the problems of the revolution to one, patiently explain, that meant that it was necessary to bring the consciousness of the masses into correspondence with that situation into which the historic process had driven them. The worker or the soldier, disappointed with the policy of the compromisers, had to be brought over to the position of Lenin and not left lingering in the intermediate stage of Kamenev and Stalin. And Trotsky continues by explaining that Lenin was not the cause of the party's struggle. His arrival simply hastened both the start and the rapid end of the crisis. Trotsky puts it like this: without Lenin, the crisis, which the opportunist leadership was inevitably bound to produce, would have assumed an extraordinarily sharp and protracted character. The conditions of war and revolution, however, would not allow the party a long period for fulfilling its mission. Thus, it is by no means excluded that a disoriented and split party might have let slip the revolutionary opportunity for many years. The role of personality arises before us here on a truly gigantic scale. It is necessary only to understand that role correctly, taking personality as a link in the historic chain. And those are interesting words, because Marxists are sometimes accused of denying the role of the individual in history. On the contrary, Marxism understands exactly that living people make history. Otherwise, why would we struggle for cadres and for parties? However, Marxism explains that an individual gains their ideas and personalities not by chance, but through experience of life. Trotsky makes the following point: Lenin was not an accidental element in the historic development, but a product of the whole past of Russian history. Along with the vanguard of the workers, he had lived through their struggle in the course of the preceding quarter century. Lenin did not oppose the party from outside, but was himself its most complete expression. In educating it, he had educated himself in it. His divergence from the ruling circles of the Bolsheviks meant the struggle of the future of the party against its past. If Lenin had not been artificially separated from the party by the conditions of emigration and war, the external mechanics of the crisis would not have been so dramatic and would not have overshadowed to such a degree the inner continuity of the party's development. From the extraordinary significance which Lenin's arrival received, it should only be inferred that leaders are not accidentally created, that they are gradually chosen out and trained up in the course of decades, that they cannot be capriciously replaced, that their mechanical exclusion from the struggle gives the party a living wound, and in many cases may paralyze it for a long period. And just to conclude, Lenin, according to Trotsky, became the unqualified leader of the most revolutionary party in the world's history because his thought and will were really equal to the demands of the gigantic revolutionary possibilities of the country and the epoch. So Lenin was not some kind of political genius who transformed Bolshevism through force of personality alone. However, Lenin was an essential part in the chain of forces that led to October. Without him, it is unlikely that the October Revolution of 1917 would have ever succeeded.